Professor Henk van Houten, border professor from the Netherlands, working on geopolitics, borders and migration. Welcome on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Is there any extra detail or comments on what you do before we launch into our agenda?
I work on borders. That is, I devote my research time largely trying to understand the epistemology, what we know of borders, and the ontology, what is out there on borders, and working from a geographical perspective and cartographical perspective, largely working on borders and also on migration. So borders and migration. Yeah, thanks.
So one of the perks of being a podcaster is getting free books. So I want to say thanks, Henk, for sending that. That was actually before I had migrated myself across a border from the UK to the US, where I now am. So yeah, I think it's high time running a geospatial podcast that we have someone who focuses on one of the most important things we put on our maps, these borders. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Henk. So let's launch into the first item. So this is a conversation about an alternative to a border-driven political map of the world. I hold a US green card, UK and Australian passports, and you hold Dutch citizenship. So with passport mobility scores of 178 and 179, we are prime examples of border privilege. At the other end of the scale, Syrians, which recently got rid of their latest dictator, are on the other end of the scale with a score of 40. So by enjoying this privilege, there's a risk in this conversation between us that we are not fully informed on the lives without that privilege. So in this light, what did you learn about the consequences of border-driven political maps when you spoke by invitation at the UNHCR in Geneva? I think, was it in December?
Yep, around that time. Thanks for the question, Wilf. It's a very nice question, very important question indeed. I think you said it right when you say privilege. I think we are and we were lucky because without any effort, simply by being born in the Netherlands, and I as a Dutch researcher and you even holding a US and UK and Australian passport, as you say, I think we've gained a golden ticket, a golden travel ticket to the rest of the world, basically. And we can indeed travel up to approximately 180 countries or so without visa, according to the Henley Passport Index a couple of years ago. That makes up of more than 80% of the possible destination of the world. No, compare this indeed, as you say, to Syria or Afghanistan, whose citizens can only travel up to 29 and 26 countries respectively. So. And this does not even include the huge global inequality in the chances of getting a visa, right? For citizens from higher ranked countries, such as the Netherlands and where I live. So given this gross inequality of the freedom of movement, purely determined by the country of origin, we have to stress this, purely determined by the country of origin. It's remarkable, I think, that in public debates and also in the UN, as you say, on borders, migration, development, so little attention is given to these, what could be called paper borders, because these borders are the fiercest borders of all. They restrict movement, if any borders. It is those borders that basically, from a distance, from afar, say you are not even entitled to travel up to that country where you can show your passport. So these pre-borders or paper borders, so the physical borders, right? These pre-borders or paper borders are the fiercest of all. It's really remarkable that we give so little attention to it. Also in our maps, in our world maps. In our world maps, we never see these visa borders. We only see the continuous lines encircled around homogeneous, assumedly homogeneous countries, container states, and do as if this is the world. Well, this is far from being the world, really, because all borders are really unequal, not equal. So a standard world map shows an image of saying basically or doing as if this is a world of states where all states are equal. That is what a standard world map shows you. It suggests you that all states are equal because all borders are given the same thin line, continuous line around homogeneous or imaginary homogeneous containers. Well, it could be further from the truth because all borders are basically unequal. given these visa borders. And this is what we have to focus on. These borders are therefore not visible on any regular world map. There's a remarkable silence about the global injustice of these borders, also in cartography, therefore. This is, I cannot put it in other words, discrimination by birth. This is what some philosophers have called, this is the lottery of birth. And this, of course, contradicts. And when I went to the UN, I, of course, spoke to them and I said, why doesn't it get more attention in our world maps in the geopolitics that we have in today? Because according to the UN Human Rights Treaty, it says everybody's born free and equal. And free and equal in dignity and rights. And everybody's endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood. Born free and equal, but not in practice. So the UN treaty is not executed by the UN itself, because basically also the UN, but definitely the states, and we are determining so much freedom and global mobility and hence human rights on the basis where one is born. In other words, we all live in paper prisons. And of course, some paper cages, these paper borders, visa borders, are more equal than others. Of course, the affluent countries are excluding those who are seen as economic risk or security risk, and that is notably the global poor. And this has huge consequences, of course. So basically a global, let's say a global upper class or aristocracy, essentially determined by birth, is locking in a global underclass from afar. Also, the US is doing, the EU is doing this according to what it used to be called the black and white list. Now it's called the positive and negative list. Don't know if it's any better. But it basically feeds into the mirage of that borders on the ground or the visible borders are all the same on a map, which is really untrue. And this is the fiercest ball of borders of all, because the consequences of these visa borders are enormous, because they have people on a negative list who have to apply for a Schengen visa, for instance, to the EU, and in most cases they don't get it. It's often refused. It implies that those people of the world are territorially trapped in these state cages, in these paper prisons, sentenced by the lottery of birth. And if you then migrate, in most cases, can only be done via smuggling, because they then they are not entitled to travel regularly, legally, some people say, to other countries where even if they're fleeing. So hence they face an incredible dangerous journey, irregular journey, including risk of exploitation, trafficking, slave trade, and ultimately, of course, the chance of paying the highest price, namely death. So refugees are seen as a risk, yet they are fleeing a risk in themselves. Is a huge paradox. So there's a huge paradox in our own geopolitics of borders. We have created a very paradoxical system, and those people who really need global mobility of freedom, they don't get it. So even if you're fleeing a risky country, you're seen as a risk.
Yeah, I think then it's maybe important to offer some context for a prompt arising from the European experience that perhaps motivates your work. Was it the influx, especially of Syrian migrants over the past decade, really, due to conflicts there, that made you give some attention to these issues?
It did, of course. In 2015, there was a huge sense of crisis, a so-called refugee crisis. But it was framed as a crisis for the states themselves of the EU, not as a crisis for the refugees, paradoxically. So it was paradoxically framed as a protection crisis for the states themselves, who were receiving people who were, of course, fleeing because they were fleeing a certain risk, namely wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and Syria, notably caused or further fed by those states who now said, you are not welcome, like the US and various European states. Another big paradox. So basically, on our maps, and especially the map of Frontex in 2015, it showed how migration was shown was with huge, big red invasion arrows. So migration, so we usually portray borders as homogeneous, continuous lines, uninterrupted, which is completely not true. Borders cannot be completely closed, then they're not borders. Then it's the end of the world. So the borders always open and close at the same time. We're not showing this on our maps. Or closed for some and open for others. Closed for some activities and closed for other activities. So it should always be permeable and it should always be selective and very nuanced, which is not showing the true reality of borders in our maps. That's one. Secondly, when we show migration, we do as if migrants are traveling with big red arrows to another country, which is basically an analogy of military or hostile invasion maps. This is how military invasions are used to be portrayed, right? With invasions coming from a certain destination to our countries, or imaginally our countries, like they're penetrating in our territory.
I've got another idea. How about the big red arrows should be going into the countries which produce these refugees to help us understand why then refugees try to escape? And I get the impression that the point of your book and the perspective that you take in your scholarship is to bring attention of those from the more privileged countries, in fact, what you characterize as extractive countries, to bring attention to our activities in terms of the red arrows going into those countries from which things are being extracted, which then produce, what are these red arrows of refugees coming out? So thanks for a bit of context about the impact on you and the thoughts that you brought into and brought out of this experience you had at the UNHCR. So in April, US Congressman Robert Garcia reminded us of President Donald Trump's cartography, where he classifies Africa as comprised of shithole countries, amongst other choice generalizations. Then on page 45 of your book, you remind us of the same. An extended quote here is instructive. Quote, overall, these borderline maps create a visual distortion of power relations that hide a crucial fact. Many of the countries represented as fragile, unfree, or corrupt are in such dire state because the roguish foreign policies of more powerful countries have contributed in a sustained manner to put them in this precarious condition. End quote. Thus, you instruct us to interpret the Fragile States Index, Corruption Perceptions Index, and Global Freedom Status as not indicating factors internal to a given underperforming, in quotes, country. Are you saying that the red parts of the Fragile States and Corruption Index maps and the purple parts of the Freedom Status map simply show where excessive extraction by powerful countries has happened? Really, therefore, do these maps instruct us where to introduce controls on the activity of powerful countries? If so, what are the mechanisms to exert this control? Did you feel the UNHCR could serve this function when you went there last month? Your book comes across as illustrating that existing controls on extractive countries are inadequate. Has the book met with people and organizations that can and want to approach these controls in new, effective ways?
Yeah, that's a great question, Wilfred, and thanks for that. That basically follows on to what you said last, that perhaps it would be a good idea to reverse the invasion arrows, no? To start with. That would be really a more honest portrayal of what is happening or has been happening over time, no? So basically, we are now doing as if migrants are coming out of nowhere and they are traveling all to Europe or all to the US, which is really untrue, of course. So the exaggeration and the surreality there is really mind-blowing, as it were. So that is because migrants do not travel all through the European Union. 85% are staying close to their original countries, are not traveling further to the EU to begin with. And we're not showing, indeed, the reverse pattern, what you are talking of now. So the predatory capitalism, for instance, or the history of colonialism, to name just another example, right? So basically what a map really does, any world map or on freedom or corruption or failed states index, and the UN is also using this, but not only UN, other organizations, political organizations, of course, as well, other think tanks based in Washington where not, are using these maps to show the diverse pattern of indeed freedom and corruption and whatnot. But of course, this is highly surreal. Because what it does, it completely ignores such a map historical patterns, historical relations that help to explain exactly those patterns. So, for instance, colonialism, predatory capitalism in the past, and of course, this predatory capitalism and imperialism is still taking place. I'm afraid to say, and the UN recognizes this.
It's picking
Yet
up the
does
pace lately.
very much so, very much so. This is only reinforced then by such maps. So maps are not neutral. We should recognize this, that maps are not neutral, and can never be neutral, can never be objective, which is not a shortage or shortcoming of maps. This is just a great way to say, wait a minute, if this is true, that no map is neutral, no map is an objective map, then maybe it's a great way to also show other perspectives, right? Only then following the same perspective over and over again, maybe the state-centric perspective, show other alternative realities, right? A map is basically a proposition. Map is a perspective. This is my proposition of the world as I see it, right? But it's a visual story. It's a visual story of the world. Ortelius, the great cartographer of the 16th century, said it right. He said, "Theatrum orbis terrarum." That's what was the name of his collection of maps. Basically saying, this is a theater of the world.
Right.
It's a great title. I love this title because that's what
only certain things make it onto the stage. That is the map.
Exactly my point. And so we need to be aware of this. What is shown on maps? And any standard map does not show the historical relations, what may have to explain what we're seeing. So basically in a map, in a standard map like the corruption index or failed index, basically you're saying, we can blame the poor for being poor.
Right. We can say that all their leaders have chosen to be corrupt. And therefore almost that the refugees have chosen to go to other countries, when maybe the proposition you're advancing is that in some cases, maybe the refugees have no choice.
No choice whatsoever. I mean, climate change.
And that the choice might have been caused by the choice to extract something by another country in their country.
Yeah, and then on to say, well, we have this burden as white men to basically help those poor people, right? So this is the white man's burden on a map, right?
Sorry to interrupt, but that white man's burden concept is kind of what I was trying to get at in the first question. That's why I tried to sort of frame it as, what did you learn when you went to the UN? And I guess what I was getting at there is that my understanding of the way that UN functions is it's a forum for representatives from any country to come and gather and to have a visceral connection and see that person, shake their hand, and thereby perhaps through that contact learn more about what their experience in the world is. Perhaps I didn't fully express my intent there in that question, but yeah, definitely I would hate for this conversation to come across as an interaction between two privileged white men experiencing or feeling a burden.
No, that's very true. But when I went to the UN, they were very, very open to this conversation, and they even said this is mind blowing, because they did not realize to the full extent that is. Of course, they're not stupid, they're not naive, but they did not realize to the full extent what a map can do. And they basically thought, we're just showing a map, we're just following the same model. This is the world, divided in state boxes, and that's the world. So, no, that's not the world. That's state perspective of the world since the 16th century. That's basically a colonial navigation map from Mercator, still imprinted on our world on a daily basis. Basically, who rules where, who governs where. I'm not saying this is wrong. It's just simplistic and naive, and it has huge consequences. But basically, you're saying, we're only showing imperialism. We're only showing anarchy. And this, of course, has huge consequences. See the land grab taking place now suggested by Trump regarding Greenland, Canada, Panama, and Gaza now.
Yes, Gaza is the latest.
So all this is not shown on maps.
Okay, so moving on to the impression that you have made on LinkedIn, at least through my observations. You're quite popular, generate a lot of comments on a few of my posts. So just to cover some of those interactions. So My post about this book on LinkedIn generated some conversations, such as with Jordan Regine, who was another podcast guest, actually with a legal background, which was a really interesting conversation. So he asked this question, quote, "Do you believe there's some reality where psychopaths and violence do not exist? How can people be empowered, if not by defining the sphere of their political influence geographically to facilitate the aspiration of self-determination? How can we prevent what we see as the unreasonable use of violence by some political actors within their boundaries without our own boundaries defining where our influence begins and theirs ends?" End quote.
Right. So no, that is a great question again. So yeah, this is great that this book has sparked such a great comments on your LinkedIn page, and it's wonderful to follow indeed, and to see these questions popping up. Hopefully more will follow. And I think the answer would be, in this case, for my end, it all starts with the imagination. You know? I think, as I said, a map is a visual story. It's an image of the world that feeds a world image, that feeds new imagination, and hence feeds how we design the world. So our design of the world feeds again, in reality, how we design the world. Because if we think in state boxes, this is going to have an effect on daily politics. So it's a certain political message that we are repeating in our maps. I'm not saying we should not do it, but I was just saying align it with other presentations, other propositions that is also happening. Not only show only territories governed by states, but also show other actors like Google, like X, like Apple, whatnot these days. These are hugely important actors, as we know, right?
But it's important to say here, so it's those companies that you've mentioned actually have as much, if not more, capital, financial capital at their disposal than many nation states.
Right, and they're not shown on maps. And the dominance of these actors, what we only show on maps is states, not these hugely important actors. Why not?
So we as the geospatial profession are in fact not delivering a true and full message about who has the power if we don't include these companies that have in fact more power than these states. That's a really interesting and important view. Yeah.
Exactly. So break free from the idea that borders are the only thing that should be represented, or the idea that state borders are given. No, borders are constructions, of course, our human constructions. They do not exist on satellite maps. So hence they are human constructions. So what I'm pleading for in the book, Freeing the Map, is basically freeing the map from a single perspective of the world. Not of that the states cannot be represented, but show other maps out there. So make honest map in this way. Show counter maps of other actors.
An honest map. That's the key phrase.
That's a key phrase for me. It indicates that honesty is of huge importance. So that also means to show responsibility as an author of the map. I think these are visual stories, hence we are authors as cartographers. So to show also responsibility in this regard and take responsibility for what is that we show. And if we're following a state-centric model, that is a model that is chosen for us, and then we're only following this. Then we are still handmaidens of the state, like in the colonial times.
So okay, there's two. Sorry, I keep butting in here, but I'm butting in because I'm being activated as someone with a career in geospatial since 2011, and you use the term responsible, and you use the term handmaiden. So, of course, so many of us, I would like to say, especially because a lot of us have had a university education, and by virtue of that, we've had a liberal arts conception of the world instilled in us through that, and also we're all humane. I'm sure plenty of us have the question of responsibility come up in our minds when we make a world map, and we might have some reservations, but we're employed. We have to earn an income, and therefore, in some respects, that makes us into a handmaiden of those who are requesting us to put that perspective forward. So, but I guess the point of your book, and maybe it's time to bring up the concept of counter mapping, is it that yes, we can make the maps that generate an income, but there needs to be some sort of outlet for us to make a parallel map that is what we would do if we felt we were delivering on our responsibility, to be honest.
Right. No, I think we do it. I fully agree. I recognize what you're saying, and I sympathize also what you're saying in terms of earning an income and all this. But I'm very sympathetic to the whole idea. But at the same time, I'm also making a plea here, because this is also from the love of cartography that this book was born, because I really love maps. And the imagination that maps feed or create is immense. No, and this is my long felt love for maps. At the same time, I'm also puzzled by those maps, because why is it that we only present these maps? And for centuries, basically, you're only showing states on a world map,
Yes.
and not counter maps, not other actors, like I just mentioned, the big media, for instance, or NGOs for that matter, or visa borders, not on maps, or people. Where's people on maps? There's no people. There's only territories. I think that we have to take responsibility. So experiences, perceptions, or relations across these borders, right? Across these state boxes. We're only showing visions, not connections. We are connected at the same time as human
Yeah.
beings on a global level, not only via climate and nature, but also via trade and exchange and internet and whatnot, not shown on the standard map. So I'm not saying abolish the world map. I'm saying create more maps, also out of the love for cartography, because we have a great discipline. I mean, the way we are able to make maps is incredible, especially considering the development of cartography. It has a long history, of course, but the power and the tools that we have today is incredible. So yes, it is. There's a lot of design possibilities to liberate the map from the state-centric logic that we are following for so long now.
Okay, so I take your book as an invitation to the profession to stop the centuries-long practice of being weak little shills for the state,
Yeah,
and consider that
yeah.
there might be another market for our services. So speaking of which, figure 40 of the book shows a hierarchy of countries by visa-free travel. Another podcast guest, a Russian, importantly or interestingly, hopefully, in this case, Alex Korolev, who's the CEO of GS Carta, thought that it might be good as an anamorphic map or cartogram. I had my own idea, an interactive map showing a border around the entire visa-free travel extent per country. Have you come across any such variations of this idea? And I'll be showing on the screen this figure 40.
Oh, yeah, no, I think that's a great idea, Wilfred. I have not seen anything like this yet. I mean, there are some artistic impressions of visa borders out there, and I try to put them in the book as well. And I've collected, and this is years of archival work, really collecting all these alternative mappings of the world in terms of visa borders, for instance, right, as an other way of showing borders on the world, and only state-centric maps in terms of physical borders, because borders are literally everywhere, and especially visa borders, as I said earlier, are the fiercest of all, hence should be represented on world maps. So I've not seen this, but I've seen a couple of very beautiful artistic impressions of the world, and also I covered them in the book. But so many things could be done, and such a map that you're showing and suggesting is great. And it's high time that we explore this field of alternative imaginations of the world, which are as valid and as valuable as the standard world map. The standard world map is not the truth itself; it's only the claim on the truth, right? So because if if a map is never the final truth, and I think we readily agree with this, all this as cartographers. No, of course not. We cannot cover the world in one map. Okay, if this is true, then it can also be true, only be truthful, not the truth. And if this is true, then we can basically next it to other maps, like the map you're suggesting, which is just another perspective, another theater of the same world.
Yes, everyone has their own stage to conceive of the world. Maybe for listeners who are on the podcast and don't have a video, so the figure 40 shows Japan, I believe, at the top, with just
Yep.
the number 193 underneath it. And then towards the middle of the map, you've got Australia, for example, with the number 185 underneath it.
Right.
Right next to Australia is the US with 186. And then towards the bottom, we have what looks like perhaps Lebanon with the number 37 underneath it. And I'm guessing it's Afghanistan, bottom right, with
Yeah.
26.
Afghanistan and Syria. Yeah.
And Syria. Yeah. So I guess what I was trying to get at with my theater, yeah,
Yeah.
this alternative view of the world, another great phrase from you, that has some honesty, yeah, is that this border map of Japan, in fact, is wrong when you consider it from the visa-free travel perspective. A Japanese person can spend, I guess, 3 months in 193 countries at the click of a mouse to book the plane ticket.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I guess actually what I'm talking about is a spatio-temporal map, an animation over time of how long, how much the Japanese border expands across the world for a 3-month period for a Japanese person. And I think this could make this kind of dynamic time-based visualization could make for a much more compelling vision of the degree of freedom that a Japanese person has versus on a whim travel versus an Afghan, and that invites the viewer of the map to consider, well, at their core is an Afghan person worthy of this restricted degree of freedom compared to a Japanese person at their core. And it brings up, if you put those people from those two countries side by side, I mean, there's the traditional dress of the Japanese, but there's also the incredible traditional dress and customs of the Afghan people. And it brings to mind the incredible hardiness in those desert environments and mountainous environments as well in Afghanistan, and the degree of respect you must have for the ability of an Afghan person to survive there. Also, coming from Australia, not to overdo this point, but the degree of respect that you must also have for the average Aboriginal Australian person who can survive in the incredible harsh desert environments there. So that's the sort of thinking that kind of a map prompts for me.
Right. That is so basically to express this global mobility of freedom and unmobility of freedom, of the unfreedom basically there, and therefore of some other people. So that and basically we have divided up the world according to the global mobility of freedom, and we're not showing this on our maps. And so some borders are more valuable than others. That's basically what you're saying. So there is basically a global division in terms of how we value apparently human beings from other countries. And it's not, all this is not shown on maps. On a standard world map, all container states are the same. And this is completely dishonest because this is completely not true.
Yeah.
If anything, this is not true because all borders are unequal and all these boxes are different.
Exactly. So
not
in
not
fact,
even showing.
Sorry to interrupt, but the standard world map, in my view, actually, there's more ways in which it is a lie or invites an incorrect view of the world than ways in which it offers the truth.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so then moving on to the next question, another passage that generated significant discussion on LinkedIn, so 22 comments, was one in which I summarized as you saying the geospatial profession is engaged in a global scheme to oppress the poor. It is honestly legendary in its clarity. You can understand why it generated so much discussion. So, quote, the visa border regime as a remote border control thus first segregates and reifies the world's population into bounded states, then categorizes and essentializes the citizens of those states according to an average characterization, and finally ranks them into a normative hierarchy. The resulting global divide in the freedom to cross borders is what we have conceptualized elsewhere as borderism, by which we mean the discriminatory politics of bordering and othering that essentialize and politicize the value of human beings on the basis of the bordered identities they are born into or are a citizen of. As the Nigerian writer Olu Temahin has put it, borders don't just keep people out, they define their worth. Moving on, put differently, a global aristocracy determined by birth is mirrored by a global underclass whom they lock in from afar while exploiting their border and resources. In practice, this implies that a majority of the world's population is territorially trapped in state cages, in quotes, paper prisons, sentenced by an inequitous lottery of birth. Paradoxically, the privileged nations of this neo-feudal system, this global apartheid, promote a dominant ideology of liberalism that praises the universal human rights on which the same international system is supposed to be built. Yet the liberal notion of universalism seems to imply a freedom and equality that apply only to people who were lucky enough to be born with the right passport. whenever those born on the wrong side of the border refuse to let their lives be determined by the place in which they were fortuitously born, and thus decide to either migrate or flee, the world of destinations to which they can legally and therefore safely travel is thus far smaller than it would be for someone born on the other side. So what is unspoken here is the participation of the geospatial profession in surveying and illustrating these borders. This is an opportunity for actually some of the people that commented on what I put on LinkedIn to put their questions directly to you. So Peter Lenz said that all models are wrong. Some are useful, and all maps are models. Saying that borders are wrong is the same thing as saying that all aggregations of data are wrong. Are mean, median, and mode evil too? So what's your response to Peter?
I'm not saying that borders are wrong. We cannot do without borders. There are borders everywhere. It's not that our borders are wrong, our maps are. So we're misrepresenting geographical reality. And that's my point, no? And hence, by doing that, our visual stories are stories that are misleading in terms of what it's covering in terms of reality. They're surreal, not real. So they're misrepresenting geographical reality, which is inevitable, but we should take responsibility for this and be honest about this. Because what we're doing there is that we are also steering reality by showing an image of the world and not saying that it's subjective or a certain perspective of the world. We are steering reality and doing as if this is neutral and objective and just an innocent map. It's never innocent. It's never
I love
neutral.
this phrase. It's just you've got some great words here. I just because it exists as a map doesn't mean we need to accept it. Is that what you're inviting us to consider?
Exactly, because we're steering reality. We have a responsibility, and it's a great discipline. And it's to take responsibility, because if we deliver stories, say on a text, right, we always say, I wrote this, no? And we never believe directly a certain story or a certain number or a certain fact. So we counter check it, whatever, no? And a map seems to escape all this. And I think it's wrong, because we should take responsibility, and because we are steering also reality, and by presenting as a neutral and objective fashion, only delivering it to the state because we're only tool makers. I think that's doing us wrong, because I think we have a bigger responsibility. What is more real, we do thereby, we silence the global injustice of the visa wars that we just talked about, these passport privileges that we started out with. So borders are not givens. They're constructs, social constructs, right? So I'd rather speak of bordering, because they are processes, right? They're constantly in the making. They need actors, they need powers to enforce them. There are borders everywhere around my neighborhood, my house, but I don't enforce them in the same way as states do, right? So it is a constant process in the making. So we're constantly making borders. It's border work, right? It's bordering. So this is what I also learned from the discipline that I'm working in, border studies, that we need to avoid what is called in our field the territorial trap, that we are trapping ourselves by beginning with the state, right? And doing as if this is a neutral way of looking at the world. No, you're already looking through the prism, through the lens of the state to the world itself. Show other actors than only looking for the state. This is a methodological nationalism. So in our own methods, also as cartographers, we are following the script of the state, feeding into nationalism. This is, of course, leading to, or normalizing, that's a better word, normalizing nativism, normalizing nationalism. This is normalizing we here, them over there.
The very map that we put in front of us that we believe is innocent, in fact, is the opposite. And we have on our walls of the classrooms of all of our students in primary school a mechanism of nationalism.
Very much so, yes. And again, there's nothing wrong with representing states, but it should always be disclaimer. This is the perspective of the state, okay. Rather than and this disclaimer or this authorship is missing. And this is indeed feeding or normalizing into nativism, our people first logic, and we over here. And nationalist prejudice, them over there. And then again, this script is being used for freedom, as we talked about earlier, freedom or corruption. And the same script is used, filling in these boxes. And of course, this is only feeding nationalist prejudice, as if those people are really different and have no connection whatsoever with we over here. We are connected. We are globally connected in so many ways, in geopolitics and trade and exchanges and internet and communication and climate and whatnot. All this is not shown on a standard map in our classrooms. I get it that we cannot show the entirety of all the possible theaters of the world or all possible propositions of the world, but to only show one image time and again, and which has become a hegemonic image, right? And the standard image of the world. When you go to a commercial shopping and you order a world map, you get the same map. If you go to a media, NGO, politics, you get the same map. This does something to our minds. No? It creates an horizon of the world which is very biased and pleading for freeing exactly that map.
I would love the chaos that would ensue if suddenly some people started offering a different map. I don't mean chaos in a good way. Okay, so another question or comment from someone on LinkedIn was Eric Love, who said, if the default way to refuse to let one's life be determined by where one is born is to flee or migrate, that is a big issue. Decision makers should not be discussing who gets to move to preferred countries without spending more time considering how to make the non-preferred countries better for the many. What's your response?
It is passport privilege. It's lottery of birth. Let's consider it this way. It is. Let's take John Rawls, the philosopher John Rawls' perspective of veil of ignorance, and what he meant with veil of ignorance, that he basically aimed to identify fair governing principles by imagining people choosing their own principles from behind a veil of ignorance, not knowing prior to the existence which places they would be born. Nobody would choose, right, to be on the Syrian, Afghanistan lower end of saying, oh, I get to, I will choose for 25 countries visa free. Nobody would do this, right? If this is true, why do we accept this order then? So
can I put this another way? Is Eric trying to get at, and we are teetering on the edge as two white men, of having a conversation which may be colonialism adjacent? So there's a really touchy issue, this, I think. But maybe a good way to, I think, a good way to approach this then is that the world may be as it currently is because of a excessive amount of extraction occurring in some countries and not so much in others, which can create a political circumstance of turmoil and inequality, which then produces these conditions which people try to flee. So is it that Eric could be responded to by saying, well, the extractive countries may wish to modulate their degree of extraction and leave some of the resources behind for those within that border so that they can better themselves and create conditions such that they would not like to flee?
No, I mean, it all starts off with making the world a better place for all, and it would be great if all countries would take this responsibility in their national policies. So it would be great if every national policy that is created would have an appendix. So what does this national policy have what kind of effect does this have on a global level? So what does your national policy have an effect on international level? Because we're not doing this at all. We are basically pleading for more anarchy and isolationism, as we are seeing. And isolationism does not help in response to this question of Eric Love. Of course, isolationism, I fully agree, does not help, but at all. Worse, it reinforces the same problems that you're trying to address, right? Also, in your own border policies vis-a-vis migrants, you are basically creating a counterproductive system in which you are basically saying that those people who are, for instance, Syria and Afghanistan, they have a less of global mobility of freedom, right? Hence, they are the only way to escape their misery is via smuggling. So criminality is basically produced, right? And smuggling is basically produced. So smugglers are the result of your own border systems. So we should really realize this, right? And of course, this will lead to insecurity at our own borders, but this is then self-inflicted. And this will lead to more fenced-in pseudo borders in place, leading to more border deaths, more violation of human rights, more freedom inequality. So it's a vicious cycle here. Yeah. So you're producing a world of visa-free for some and visa restricted for others based on the term on where people are born. And then you basically are hollowing out your own rule of law because you create more insecurity, more chaos. So you need more border police. So you're hollowing out yourself, no, your own rule of law, democracy, international solidarity. It leads to more isolationism and more xenophobia. So it's a vicious cycle.
I have a practical example. So 1953, President Mossadegh of Iran, who was democratically elected and was proud that he had conducted a democratic process in alignment with a country that he respected, America. Yeah. So this guy decided to do something for the Iranian people, which was to nationalize Iran's oil fields, to begin to contain some of the natural resources of the country for the benefit of his people. The consequence, though, was that suddenly the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, run by the UK, could no longer use those resources in the furtherance of the British Empire. So then the UK tried to remove him. They failed. And then they convinced the US government to use the CIA to go and remove Mossadegh. That then put in play a almost half-century long, in fact, a half-century long series of conflicts and turmoil and rejection of Iran from the global system. So here is an example, really, of a democratically elected leader in a country that is now rejected from the modern democratic world because he was trying to retain some of those resources to better his people. Is that, I think, possibly a useful example?
Yeah, very much so, very much so. So all these interventions from CIA and whatnot, from the US, but also from the UK in the past, from European states, so many interventions, tumbling down other democracies or other leaderships in the benefit of the US, European states or Australian states. So to basically is an example of an illiberal world, right? Under the veil of liberalism, under the veil of bringing democracy, you're basically creating or sustaining a predatory capitalism for yourself, right? And all this, we know this is happening. We're not naive. You see these on the news daily, right? And there's so many books and articles about this and on this predatory capitalism and the past of colonialism. I mean, there's studies about this, right? There's libraries to be filled. Yet, it is what is striking. It never appears on our maps. And we do as if all this, yes, we know it's true. This is reality, and of course, there's interconnections in this regard. And all these countries have a past of being colonized and still being exploited, like many African states today are built, of course, being exploited. We know all this, and we go to a world map and say, yeah, this is the world, and we do as if these are all the same boxes of equal worth.
Yes, but the world map tells us that the Iranian border should have been impregnable. It should not have been possible for an extractive state to attempt to blithely cross the border as though it didn't exist and go and remove not just anyone, not just the CEO of the Anglo-Persian oil company or its Iranian replacement, but no, the leader of the country. So the world map tells us that all of that should be impossible and should never occur. But in fact, that's exactly what did occur. An extractive country went in and removed the democratically elected leader of a country offering a resource that was of interest to other countries. So there's a tagline at the bottom of the book. So from Atlas to Hermes. So maybe a good way to finish up is just to characterize who Hermes is.
Hermes this is a nod back. This is a wing back to Gerardus Mercator, the inventor of the colonial state atlas of his day, because he was basically following the state logic of his day. So he wanted to show the world that was known and what could be still discovered, read, conquered in the colonial 16th century, right? And he coined this collection of maps an atlas, from the godly figure Atlas, who was carrying the world, the celestial spheres originally, the world on his shoulders. He thought it was a nice figure. My plea is to liberate the map from this state-centered perspective. Not that we can do without states or that we should not represent states, but to show also the multiple nationalities within states, or diverse international relations, or historical dependencies, or interaction and experience of people, only then state territories, which is the dominant logic of the day. So this is because this is, as the surrealist René Magritte, the painter, said, this is ceci n'est pas un pipe. This is not a pipe. Perhaps you know this image of the pipe. But a map basically is the same. Ceci n'est pas le monde. This is not the world. This is only an image of the world. Right? This is not the world itself. So this gives us a lot of leeway to redesign the world. And to show other images of the world, really. And Hermes comes in, the godly figure of Hermes, which is the grandson of Atlas. So it's a wink, it's a nod back to Mercator, basically saying, listen, he has carried the world now, the representation of the world, for 5 centuries long. So it is not only high time to free the map, but also free this poor man, Atlas, from having to carry the burden of representing the entirety of the world on his own. Maybe it's high time that his grandson is also given a certain stage. Hermes is the messenger. He's the connector, the god of connections, interconnection between human beings. And he is the godly figure of communication, of interaction, of connection. So I bring into the stage, I bring to the fore this godly figure of Hermes, basically as a practical joke, as it were, as a cartographer myself, and through the cartographer of Mercator 5 centuries ago. So maybe it's high time we bring in another god that is showing human experiences, showing connectivity, and that we free not only Atlas, but also free the map, but also free Atlas, and bring in honesty. And again, so modesty and others and honesty. So make different stories, new propositions, new perspectives, not only storyline of the state, but other show human beings, and show the lively world, the life world of human beings, of animals, and show emotions. So free the map from its territorial trap that it has been undergoing for so many centuries. Because I really think that we can as a cartographers, we can help change the world, because it has fed for so many centuries now the world image that we are living in today, which is state dominated.
Yeah, this map to me almost sets the task for those who look at it as their life chore is to define. It defines their experience as one of imperialism and colonialism. So if we have a map that sets a different task for humanity, I think we might have an interesting future. Henk, this was a real highlight of my career, actually, in geospatial sense. Finished my master's at Melbourne University in 2010. And the experience I've had across 5 countries, I've almost been waiting, really, and needing, actually, this conversation. And I don't want it to be the last one. And I think many of the listeners of this podcast will feel the same way. Actually, there is a therapeutic impact for a lot of us through understanding that your scholarship exists. So it's a privilege. Henk, thank you.
The privilege and honor is all mine. And thank you so much for having me, Wilfred. It's a real privilege and has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.